On the command deck of the Galactic Council's primary station, the mood was one of grim, quiet resignation. The silent rip filled the main display, its ominous shimmer a constant, accusing presence. Counselor Gron watched, his heavy features set in a stony mask. The final, frantic signals from the human ship, the final dawn, had been intercepted before they were lost in the interference. A suicidal plunge into the anomaly. A pointless, defiant gesture. It was, he thought, typical of their short-lived, emotional species. To choose a dramatic death over a quiet, managed one. The rogue vessel has been destroyed by the anomaly. A Velenith technician reported, its voice a soft buzz. No further energy signatures detected. Elder Valine's antennae drooped slightly. A waste, even a short-lived species held some value. But their disobedience had been a distraction. Now, the real work of managing the retreat could continue. He was about to order the display switch to the evacuation schedules when the technician spoke again, its tone suddenly uncertain. Energy reading from within the anomaly. It is changing. On the screen, the silent rip did not explode. It shimmered. The chaotic, oily swirls began to move in a new pattern, converging towards the point where the human ship had vanished. From that center, a deep, resonant tone began to emit a sound that was not a sound, but a vibration felt in the bones of the station, a frequency that registered on every sensor across the spectrum. What is that? Gron demanded, leaning forward. The rip pulsed. With each pulse, the wave of white light they had seen wash over the final dawn expanded outwards, like a ripple on a pond. But where the ripple passed, the shimmering wrongness did not tear further. It smoothed. It stabilized. The violent, ragged edges of the anomaly began to soften, to knit together. The terrible silent scream of static on all channels began to diminish, replaced by a growing, profound quiet. It's shrinking, the technician whispered. A note of awe in its artificial translation. Impossible. Gron stared. The human device, their coda, was not a bomb. It was a counter-frequency. It was doing exactly what the humans had said might be possible. It was healing the tear from the inside out. The scale of it, the audacity of it, sent a cold shock through his massive frame. They had not been making a pointless gesture. They had been executing a plan. A plan the Council had declared impossible. Across the galaxy, on every world with a sensor pointed at the sky, the same miracle played out. The expanding wave of destruction halted. Then, slowly, inexorably, it began to recede. The locked-down hyperlanes, sealed by the preservation edict, flickered. The artificial barriers, meant to keep the danger out, or the condemned in, collapsed as the spatial stress that had justified them vanished. Space was becoming calm again. On the crippled bridge of the final dawn, consciousness returned to Jin piece by piece. There was pain and the sharp smell of burnt wiring and the blaring of a dozen critical alerts. But the violent shaking was gone. The terrible pull of the rip was gone. He pushed himself up from the console. Next to him, Lee was unconscious but breathing, the med pack glowing softly around his wound. Hannah was stirring in her seat. "Jin?" She croaked. He looked at the viewport. The shimmering wall was gone. In its place was normal, peaceful star-speckled blackness. At the very center, a few lingering tendrils of silvery light faded away, like the last notes of a song. Their ship was battered, bleeding air and power, but it was intact. They were alive. Did it work? Hannah asked. Her eyes wide. Chin brought up the long-range scanner. The anomaly was not just gone from their view. The sensors showed a clean, stable sector of space. The silent rip was a memory. It worked, he said, and the words felt too small for what he felt. The cum system, dead for so long, suddenly crackled to life. Not with static, but with voices. Dozens of them. Hundreds. They were confused, jubilant, fearful, awestruck. They were the voices of the Rill and the Mycen, of human colonies and independent stations, all talking over each other, asking what had happened. The cage of the preservation edict was broken. Then, a clear, powerful signal cut through the chatter. It was from the Earth flagship Unity, and it was being broadcast on all Council frequencies. The voice of Earth's ambassador was calm, without a trace of gloating. To all species of the galactic commons, the spatial anomaly known as the Silent Rip has been neutralized. The threat is over. The hyperlane network is reopening. We extend our wishes for peace and recovery to all. There was no mention of the Council, no mention of the betrayal. The message was a simple statement of fact, and it was more devastating to the Council's authority than any accusation. Back at Facility Themis, Mina and Day were engulfed in a roar of cheers. They hugged, tears streaming down their faces, before rushing to the coms. Final dawn, this is Themis. Do you read? Jin, Hannah, Lee. After a long, tense minute, Jin's voice, weak but clear, came back. We read you, Themis. We're here. A little broken, but here. The relief that washed over them was a physical force. They had done it in the Council chamber. The silence was now one of deep, shameful shock. The display showed the repaired sector. It showed the reopening lanes. It showed the frantic, joyous communications flooding in from the species they had abandoned. Elder Velin looked from the screen to Gron. There was nothing to say. They had ignored the warning. They had sealed the doors. And humanity, from the outside, had not forced the lock. They had simply removed the reason for it. They had fixed the problem while the Council was busy building walls. The finale had not been an explosion. It was a restoration, and it had been delivered by the species they considered least. Weeks later, on a quiet observation deck of a restored space station, Jin stood with Hannah, Day, and Mina. Lee was recovering well in a medical bay, already joking about getting a new ship. Below them, the viewport showed the calm, starry space where the Rip had been. Traffic flowed against ships of all kinds, rebuilding, reconnecting. They were heroes now, across the galaxy. The humans who had acted when the elders had failed. But standing there, they didn't feel like heroes. They felt tired and grateful, and deeply aware of how close it had been. They won't forget this, Mina said softly. But I wonder if they've learned. Maybe not, Day replied, putting an arm around her. But they will never ignore us again. Jin watched a human freighter glide past, its hull gleaming in the light of a distant sun. They had brought the finale, not with a roar of war, but with the precise, saving note of a song only they had dared to sing. The galaxy was quiet again. And in that quiet, the voice of humanity would forever have a new, unignorable weight. The final dawn was no longer a ship. It was a scream in the dark. The second gravity slingshot had been worse than the first. A shower of sparks had erupted from a console behind Jin, and the sharp smell of ozone filled the cockpit. The groaning of the hull was a constant, deep sound, like a great beast in pain. Lee fought the controls, his muscles taut. The path Day had charted was less a road and more a series of cliff edges. They were falling from one to the next, using the momentum to hurtle towards the Silent Rip. The stars outside were no longer points of light, but smeared lines of white fire. Approaching the third marker, Lee called out, his voice tight. This is the big one. The binary black holes. Hannah, strapped into her seat beside the pulsating core of the Coda device, watched her screens. The energy readings from the Rip were spiking. It was a storm front of distorted reality, still weeks away at normal travel, but they were not traveling normally. The device is stable, she reported, but the closer we get, the more it's reacting. It's listening. Jin, monitoring the navigation and the pursuing signals, saw the new blips appear on the edge of their sensor range. Interceptors. 2 Katari clawships. They found our trail. The Council had finally understood they were not heading for the core worlds, but out towards the disaster zone. They likely thought it was a suicidal protest or a desperate bid to evacuate some doomed human outpost. The order would be to stop them. "We can't outrun them in open space," Lee said. "We need that third slingshot, now." The binary system filled the viewport. It was not beautiful. It was a violent dance of 2 starving points of blackness, pulling space itself into a swirling, deadly vortex. Radiation alarms screamed. Lee took the ship straight into the maelstrom. The gravity seized them. It was not like flying. It was like being in a fist. The final dawn was tossed, spun, crushed. Metal shrieked. A support beam buckled in the rear compartment. Jin's screen went dark and flickered back on, showing a cascade of system failures. Lee shouted, wrestling with the stick, his face slick with sweat. For a terrifying moment, they were caught, trapped between the 2 pulls, threatening to be torn apart. Then, with a final brutal shove, the chaos spat them out. They were flung forward like a stone from a sling, their speed almost doubling in an instant. The pursuing Katari ships, more massive and less agile, tried to follow. One was caught in the outer turbulence, sent spinning off course with a damaged drive. The other fell back, unable to match the insane maneuver. "We're clear of them," Jin breathed, checking the rear scans. "For now." But the victory was costly. A new, more urgent alarm blared. "Engine 2 is failing," Lee said, his voice grim. "We've got a hull breach in the lower deck. It's sealed, but the structural integrity is down to 40%. We can't take another hit like that." They were hurt and limping, but they were on the final stretch. The silent rip dominated the view now. It was not a hole, but a wrongness. A patch of space that shimmered like oil on water, swallowing the light from the stars behind it. It pulsed with a slow, sick rhythm. The static on the comms was a roar. Back at Facility Themis, Mina and Day were living a parallel nightmare. They watched the telemetry from the final dawn, each stress alert feeling like a physical blow. Day was trying to patch their navigation through the growing subspace interference, rerouting them around the worst of the turbulence. "The Council network is lighting up," Mina said, her fingers flying over a separate console. "They're calling the final dawn a rogue element. They're saying we're trying to destabilize the containment efforts." She let out a bitter laugh. "Containment. They're not containing anything. They're just running." She had an idea. It was risky. Using old backdoor codes from her time on the Council station, she began to access the public sensor, the one that monitored traffic and spatial weather. With careful, subtle commands, she created a ghost. A false sensor echo, far from the final dawn's actual position, that mimicked the signature of a large ship attempting to breach the hyperlane cordon. She fed it into the network. On the Council interceptor screens, it would look like a new, more urgent threat. A decoy dot it worked. The remaining Katari ship broke off its pursuit, turning to intercept the Phantom. The path to the rip was open. "Last leg?" Lee's voice came through, scratchy with static, preparing for final approach. "It's getting rough out here." Space around the rip was not empty. It was filled with swirling debris asteroids, dust, the remnants of what might have been a planet, all caught in the tidal forces and glowing with strange energy. Lee weaved the wounded final dawn through the chaotic field. A shard of rock the size of a building clipped their port side. The ship shuddered violently. A console exploded near Lee. He cried out, throwing an arm up as shrapnel ripped through his flight suit. Jin unbuckled and stumbled forward. Lee was slumped in his chair, a deep gash on his shoulder, his right arm hanging useless. "I'm okay," Lee gritted out, his face pale. "You have to take the helm, Jin. You know the course. Get us to the insertion point." Jin had never flown a starship, but he had studied the simulations for 100 hours. He slid into the pilot's seat, his hands gripping the controls. They felt alien and heavy. He could feel the ship's damage and the sluggish response. Hannah left the Coda console for a moment to strap a med pack around Lee's shoulder, her movements quick and precise. 500 kilometers to threshold, Jin said, reading the numbers. The rip filled the entire viewport now, a shimmering, silent wall of annihilation. The ship began to vibrate, every bolt and weld protesting. "The Coda device is primed," Hannah said, returning to her station. "It's drawing power from the rip's field. We have one shot. We need to be at the exact epicenter." Jin guided them closer. The forces were immense. It felt like pushing against a hurricane. Alarms were constant now, a chorus of failure. Hull integrity dropped to 20%. 10. "Now, Jin." "Launch it," Hannah shouted. Jin's finger stabbed the final command. With a deep thud that resonated through the ship, the Coda device was ejected. They watched on the rear camera as the sleek cylinder, glowing with stolen energy, flew straight into the heart of the shimmering wrongness. For a second, nothing happened. Then the silent rip flashed. Not an explosion, but a wave of pure, white light that expanded silently, washing over the final dawn. The ship was tossed end over end. Jin lost control. The last thing he saw was the light everywhere. Before his world went black dot at Themis, the feed from the final dawn cut out. The last image was the white flash. The silence in the control room was absolute. Mina reached out and took Day's hand. They could only wait and hope their finale had begun. The static started as a whisper, a faint hiss in the deepest frequency bands that only the most sensitive astronomical arrays could detect. Within weeks, it grew to a murmur, disrupting long-range communications between fringe colonies. The silent rip was no longer a silent, hidden tear. It was beginning to scream. On the Galactic Council's primary station, the mood shifted from dismissive neglect to a cold, calculated anxiety. The human projections, which had been filed away as alarmist, were proving to be dangerously accurate. Emergency sessions were called. Jin and Mina, now back at Facility Themis, watched the public council feeds with a bitter sense of vindication that felt like ash. In their mouths, Elder Vylene's image flickered on the screen, its usually smooth carapace seeming to vibrate with tension. The spatial anomaly has entered a phase of accelerated growth. The integrity of subspace in the surrounding sectors is now compromised. There was no apology, no mention of the human scientists who had warned them. After thorough analysis, the Council has determined the phenomenon is uncontainable with any known technology. The words echoed through the control room. They let out a low, angry breath. Hannah's hands clenched into fists on the console. On screen, Counselor Gran appeared next. Therefore, the Galactic Council hereby enacts the Preservation Edict. All resources are to be directed to the safeguarding of core systems and the preservation of senior species continuity. A controlled withdrawal will begin immediately. A star map flashed, showing the affected region. Then, with a series of stark red lines, it showed the new policy. Hyperlanes, the faster-than-light pathways through subspace, were being sealed, not just near the rip, but around entire sectors deemed peripheral. The lines of red cut off whole swaths of the galaxy, including the Sol system and every human colony. They were locking the door, and humanity was on the outside. "They're not just leaving us," Mina said, her voice hollow. "They're trapping us here. They're making sure we can't even run." Chaos erupted across the human networks. The message from Earth's leaders was one of fierce, defiant calm, but the fear was palpable. They had been abandoned. The great galactic community, which humanity had worked so hard to join, had shown its true face. It was every species for itself, and humanity was not considered worth saving. At Facility Themis, the fear quickly hardened into a sharper, more dangerous resolve. Project Finale was no longer a desperate plan. It was the only plan. But the Preservation Edict had created a new, massive problem. Lee, the pilot, pointed at the tactical display. The red lines of sealed hyperlanes formed a cage around them. The final dawn is fast, but it's not magic. We can't get to the Rip's heart without using the major lanes. The Council will have patrols. They'll shoot anything that tries to break the cordon. They'll see it as a panic-driven intrusion or worse, an act of war. We need a different road, Jin said, studying the star charts. A road they don't watch because they think it's impossible. Hana and Day had been working non-stop. The Coda device was ready, a sleek, ominous cylinder waiting in the heart of the final dawn. But a key without a door was useless. Day pulled up a new set of calculations. Gravity. We use gravity itself. The old slingshot method, but bigger. He displayed a path that looked like a madman's scribble. It looped dangerously close to a series of unremarkable stars. These are not just stars. They are binary pairs with miniature, fast-spinning black holes at their center cosmic pinwheels. The gravitational turbulence is immense. No sane pilot would go near them. No council ship ever does. Lee leaned in, his eyes tracing the path. You want to use them as a catapult? Yes, Hannah said. We bounce from one gravity well to the next, building speed, riding the turbulence like a surfer on a wave. It will tear a normal ship apart. But the final dawn is built for the stresses of the Rip. It must. Hold together. It will get us past their cordon without touching a single sealed hyperlane, they finished. They won't be looking for us there. The decision was made. There were no other options. Pre-flight checks began. The final dawn was moved to its launch bay, a dark cavern in the asteroid. It looked like a spearhead, all sharp angles and reinforced hull, with the Coda device visible as a pulsating heart in its center. The final Council broadcast before the communications finally dissolved into static was the hardest to watch. It was a list of species whose evacuation requests had been prioritized. Humanity's name was not on it. Representatives from other abandoned species, the aquatic rill, the fungal collective mycin pleaded, then protested, then raged. Their signals were cut off mid-transmission. The message was clear. The decision was final. The gates were closed. On the night before the launch, Jin found Mina in the observation blister, looking at the stars that were now their cage. We tried to warn them, she said softly. And for that, they punish us all. We're not being punished, Jin replied, though he didn't fully believe it. We're being filtered out. We're a variable they don't want to deal with. So we will be a variable they can't ignore, a new voice said. It was Lee, already in his flight suit. He joined them, his face serious. They think by closing the doors, the problem goes away. They think we will just die quietly. We will show them a different ending. The next morning, there were no grand speeches. The crew of the final dawn Lan Li as pilot, Jin and Hana to monitor the Coda device boarded the ship. Mina and Day would remain at Themis, guiding them remotely through a network of hidden buoys they had deployed weeks earlier. A fragile string of breadcrumbs through the dark. The launch was smooth and quiet. The final dawn slipped out of the asteroid belt, a gray shadow against the black. For a while, they moved like any other human ship, on simple fusion drives. Then, they reached the first point on Day's mad path. On the screens, the star system looked calm. Sensors told a different story, a raging torrent of gravitational waves. Engaging thrusters on my mark, Lee said, his hands steady on the controls. Hold on to something. The ship shuddered as it dove into the invisible storm. Alarms blared for a second before Lee silenced them. The hull groaned. The stars outside blurred and streaked as they were whipped around the black hole's precipice, then flung forward at impossible speed. Back at Themis, Day watched the telemetry, his knuckles white. First slingshot successful. They're on course for the second. Mina monitored the council channels. Their departure had not gone unnoticed. A patrol ship had detected the unusual gravity wake. A query had been sent. Then, when no compliant answer came, a warning. Finally, an order to stand down. They've been flagged, Mina said. The council is dispatching interceptors. They think we're trying to force our way into the core worlds. Lee's voice crackled over the tight beam comm, strained but clear. Let them think that. They're looking the wrong way. The final dawn shot towards the second gravity well, a tiny ship on a road made of nightmares, carrying the only hope for the very people who had just locked them out to die. The betrayal was complete. Now came the reply. The silence on Earth was the loudest thing Hannah had ever heard. It wasn't a true silence, of course. In the underground command center, there was the constant low hum of machines, the soft tapping of keys, and the murmur of hushed voices. But the silence she felt was the absence of an answer from the stars. The official Galactic Council response had finally arrived. A bland document stating the human report on the so-called silent rip was under continued review. It was a polite way of saying they had been filed away and forgotten. Hannah spun in her chair to face Day, her fellow engineer. His face was lit by the glow of a dozen schematics floating above his workstation. They showed a chaotic mess of energy fields and theoretical equations. They're not going to do anything, Hannah said, her voice calm but certain. Day didn't look up. We knew that was the most likely outcome. He finally gestured at the swirling diagrams. So we do it ourselves. Do what, exactly? She asked, though she already knew the answer. They had been working on it in whispers for weeks, ever since the raw data from Jin and Mina had been secretly routed to them, bypassing official channels. Project Finale, Day said, finally meeting her gaze. His eyes were tired but focused. We build the solution they think is impossible. The idea was terrifying in its simplicity and its arrogance. The Coda device, as they had code-named it, was not a weapon. It was a resonator, a concept based on the fringe theories of human physicists from the previous century. The silent rip was like a terrible, everlasting note played on the fabric of reality. The Coda device would find that note's opposite frequency and play it back, canceling it out, making the universe quiet again. The Council's scientists had seen the theory and called it charming musical metaphor, not practical physics. Humanity, however, had a history of making metaphors real. The order came from the highest levels of the unified Earth government, in total secrecy. They could not afford panic, and they could not afford the Council finding out and stopping them. Project Finale was given a home. Facility Themis, hidden in the dense heart of the asteroid belt. From the outside, it looked like just another mining and refining outpost. One of thousands. Hannah and Day arrived on a supply shuttle, their names on mundane manifests as metallurgy specialists. The interior of Themis was a different world. It buzzed with a quiet, determined energy. Scientists, engineers, and technicians, all the best minds Earth and its colonies could quietly divert, worked in a coordinated rush. The heart of the facility was a massive chamber where the first prototype of the Codacol was being assembled. It looked like a complex metal flower surrounded by a web of wires and coolant pipes. "It's beautiful," Hannah whispered, her professional coolness melting for a moment. "It has to work. Day replied, already pulling up his datapad to check the power alignment sequences. Weeks blurred into months. Progress was a series of tiny victories and frustrating setbacks. The main problem was power. To generate the necessary resonant frequency, even for a moment, required more energy than a medium-sized city used in a year. They couldn't just plug it in. The solution came from a young propulsion specialist named Lee, who was transferred in from the Martian fleet. He proposed a radical idea. They wouldn't generate the power. They would steal it. The rip itself, Lee explained, his hands moving quickly as he drew in the air. It's pouring out absurd levels of hyperspatial energy. We just need to get the device close enough to tap that flow, use the rip's own power to fuel the frequency that kills it. It's like using a fire to put itself out. It was brilliant and incredibly dangerous. It meant the coded device had to be delivered right into the heart of the anomaly. Designing a ship that could survive that journey, even for a few moments, became the new focus. They called it the Final Dawn. While the engineers built, the politicians played a careful game. Earth's representatives on the council smiled and nodded. They asked polite questions about minor trade agreements. They requested permits for resource prospecting in the asteroid belt, which were granted without a second thought. The Velenith and Qatari. Observers in the solar system reported back that humanity was busy with what young species always did, digging up rocks and building clumsy, short-range ships. It was seen as quaint, a sign of their primitive stage. The idea that in the darkness of the asteroid belt, they were forging a key to a galactic lock was unthinkable. Jin and Mina, still on the council station, became ghosts. Officially, they were awaiting further instructions. In reality, they were isolated. Their access to shared data networks was subtly restricted. They spent their days running endless simulations on private human systems, refining the predictive models of the RIP's growth. The news was bad. It was accelerating faster than even their original projections. Every few days, Mina would send a tight beam encrypted data packet to Themis, containing the latest figures. The timer was ticking louder. One evening, Jing received a coded message. It was from an old teacher on Earth, containing what seemed like a family recipe. Hidden within it was a single line of text. The children are building a very loud bell. They need the exact note. It was the signal. Project Finale was moving to its final phase. They were needed. Getting them off the council station without raising alarms was its own operation. They requested a leave of absence, citing psychological fatigue from the recent stress. The council, almost with a sense of relief to be rid of the troublesome alarmists, approved it quickly. A human transport picked them up. It didn't go to Earth. It took a long looping course and docked quietly at facility Themis. When the airlock opened, and Hannah and Day were there to meet them. Jin felt a tension he had carried for months finally ease, just a little. He wasn't alone anymore. Mina hugged Hannah, a silent understanding passing between them. Day showed them to the main chamber. The Coda device was now housed in a sleek, armored casing, connected to a framework that would soon be the Final Dawn. "Welcome to the end of the world," Day said, with a humorless smile. Or the sating of it. They worked. There were no more days or nights, only progress and the relentless data from the stars. The silent rip was now causing faint subspace static, a whispers of distortion that was starting to affect long-range communications on the fringes of known space. The Council finally issued a statement, acknowledging the ongoing spatial disturbance and advising ships to avoid the region. It was a far cry from the mobilization Jin and Mina had begged for. Hannah looked at the latest readings from the Odyssey, which was now being evacuated. "They're still just watching," she said. Jin stood next to her, looking at the nearly complete Final Dawn. "Then it's good. We decided not to just watch with them." The preparations were almost complete. The warning had been given, and ignored. Now there was only the doing. The vast observation deck of the Galactic Council station was silent. The stars, sharp and cold against the blackness, looked eternal. Jin leaned against the railing, but he did not see their beauty. He only saw the data, the terrifying numbers scrolling behind his eyes. Beside him, Mina tapped a final command into her wrist display, her expression set in a hard line. They had been awake for 36 hours straight, checking and rechecking, hoping for a mistake. There was no mistake. "They're ready for us," Mina said, her voice low. Jin nodded, pushing himself upright. He smoothed the simple gray uniform of a human science envoy, a uniform that felt too new, too insignificant in this place of ancient power. The walk to the council chamber was a long one. The hallway was made of a seamless, glowing material, and the air smelled faintly of ozone and something floral, an alien scent that had never grown familiar. Representatives of older species glided past them. A Velenoth, its slender insectoid form clicking softly, gave them a slow, multifaceted look before moving on. A Kaitari, a being of dense muscle and slow deliberation, did not look at them at all. Humanity had only joined the Galactic Commons a generation ago. They were the newcomers, the curious children from a young world. The chamber doors opened without a sound. Inside, the space was vast and circular. Seats rose in tiers, many occupied by holographic projections of council members from distant systems. At the center, in physical form, were the senior delegates. Elder Vilene of the Velenoth, whose chitinous shell gleamed under the lights, and Councillor Gron of the Kaitari, his broad face unreadable. "Proceed." Envoys from Sol, Vilene's voice buzzed. Translated instantly by the implants in Jin and Mina's ears. Mina stepped forward. A holographic projector activated at her feet, and the star field of the galactic arm appeared above them. "Honored Council," she began, forcing her voice to be calm. "Data from the research station Odyssey, which we co-manage with Qatari science teams, has revealed a critical phenomenon." She zoomed the display in on a seemingly empty patch of space. 3 cycles ago, we detected anomalous gravitational readings. Subsequent analysis confirms it is a hyperspatial instability. We have named it the Silent Rip. Jin took over, his fingers moving to highlight streams of data. It is not a black hole. It is a tear in the fabric of subspace itself. It is expanding exponentially, feeding on the latent background energy of the vacuum. He pulled up the predictive model. A red web-like structure began to grow on the map, slowly at first, then faster, consuming star systems. Our projections show that, unchecked, it will reach critical growth in approximately 15 standard years. Within 50 years, it will render this entire galactic quadrant uninhabitable, disrupting subspace travel, stellar stability, and fundamental physics within its sphere. A murmur, soft and electronic, rippled through the holographic audience. Councillor Gron shifted his weight, a low rumble coming from his chest. Projections are calculations. The universe is full of energetic phenomena that flare and fade. Your models are? New. We have run the models on the Qatari quantum core you provided, Mina said quickly. We have shared all our raw data. The result is the same. The Silent Rip is an existential threat. It requires immediate and coordinated action to study a containment or reversal protocol. Elder Vilene's antennae twitched. Immediate action, you say? What do you propose? A fleet? A gravity bomb? Such tools are for wars, not for science. We propose a dedicated research task force, Jin said. A pooling of resources from every species with expertise in spacetime mechanics. The Odyssey's initial data suggests the rip has a resonant frequency. If we can find it, we might be able to collapse it safely. Might, Gron repeated, the word heavy with skepticism. You speak of pooling resources from ancient civilizations for a mite, based on the readings of one station. The Velenoth have watched stars die for 1,000,000 of your years. The Kitari have engineered black holes. We have seen no such anomaly in our long histories. That is precisely why this is a threat. Mina's composure cracked for a second. It is something new, something your histories don't account for. The silence that followed was colder than space. Vylene's faceted eyes reflected Jin's own worried face back at him 100 times. Enough, Vylene mused. The Council acknowledges the report from the human envoys. The data will be reviewed by our own committees in due course. The situation, while interesting, does not constitute an emergency that overrides existing resource allocations. The Kitari are overseeing the stabilization of the Cygnus Vector Nebula. The Velenoth are reweaving the hyperlanes near core systems. These are proven priorities. Jin felt a hollow pit open in his stomach. Due course? Honored elder, with respect, we don't have due course. Every day we delay, the energy required to fix this grows. Please, you must remember your place, Gran interrupted, his tone not angry, but dismissive, like an adult correcting a child who has spoken out of turn. You bring us a theory. We will consider it. The council is adjourned. The lights on the floor beneath them dimmed. The holograms of the other delegates winked out. Vylene and Gran turned away, already speaking to each other in low tones, their conversation no longer translated. They were ignored. The meeting, the culmination of their work and their fear, was over. The walk back to their quarters was a blur. The station's artificial beauty now seemed like a cruel joke. Once inside their small assigned room, Jin sat heavily on a bench, staring at the wall. They didn't listen, Mina said, her voice flat. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring at her hands. They saw our uniforms, our young faces, and they heard nothing. Jin activated a small private recorder, one that used old human audio technology, unconnected to the station's network. He held it up, his face grim in the low light. This is Jin, chief astronomer of the Odyssey. The full report on the Silent Rip designation Alpha threat has been presented to the Galactic Council. They have shelved it. They are ignoring the warning. He paused, the weight of the future pressing down on him. I don't know if anyone will ever hear this, but someone needs to know. We tried. He stopped the recording. Outside their viewport, the traffic of starships continued, orderly and calm, a dance of lights against the dark. Life went on as it had for millennia. No one knew that a timer had just started, a timer only 2 humans and a handful of their colleagues seemed to see. The galaxy slept, and Jin felt more alone than he ever had floating in the void. The next move was unclear, but one thing was certain. Waiting for the council to act was a death sentence. He looked at Mina and saw the same desperate resolve forming in her eyes. They had to do something, even if no one was listening.